Our final speaker today is Bob Main. He is president and founder of WebVision Centers Group, a consulting firm that specializes in business development for eye care companies and technologies. He also advises NASA on new eye care technologies, which is supported by a research grant from the National Space Biomedical Research Institute. In addition to this work, Mr. Main is part of the Development and Marketing Committee at Prevent Blindness. Today, Mr. Main will discuss his work with NASA around vision and eye health in space. Welcome.
Great. Thanks very much. Appreciate being here. And I guess the first thing I want to do is thank Hugh and his gang and Prevent Blindness for all the work that they do. They do a great job. I've been working with them as volunteer for about 12 years now. And not only do they do great work in advocacy, which is what they're doing here, but they also in many other areas around the country. So good job to them. And I want to thank you for giving me some of your time to talk about a couple subjects that I just find fascinating and find very exciting. And so this morning I want to talk about astronauts. I want to talk about NASA. I want to talk about eye care technology that's going to help the astronauts get to Mars. And some of that technology is going to be showing up in your eyeglasses in the not too distant future. I also want to talk about a company called, an organization called the NSBRI. It's a little known organization that stands for National Space Biomedical Research Institute. That is a mouthful. And they're based in Houston and they're funded by NASA, and their whole job, their whole purpose in life is to find experts around the globe to help solve and identify some of the problems that astronauts have in long-duration flights. And that's kind of one of the underlying messages that I want to have today is astronauts, as we stay in space longer, are getting a lot of issues, physical issues, that are creating problems for them. So the NSBRI is helping NASA to find and to solve these problems. All right, so I've been in the industry all my life. It's all I've ever done, and had a lot of fun with it. And as you mentioned in the introduction, I've been doing business development for eye care technology for about 10 years now, and there's a lot of cool stuff going on. The way that you do eye exams, it's just going to be totally changed in the not too distant future. Some discussion about smartphones. You do an eye exam or get a retinal image from that. And it's in its infancy, but it's going to be growing. It's going to take off. So the NSBRI last summer put together a committee. And the committee was a bunch of ophthalmologists, very prominent ophthalmologists, PhDs, business people from the optical industry. And I was asked to be on the committee, and the whole purpose that we had was to take our collective knowledge and experience and to make recommendations to the NSBRI and to NASA about what the solution might be for some of these problems. So fortunately, I was given a grant subsequent to that committee in my company to help find companies and search them out and develop some of these technologies that are going to help solve these visual problems. So that's what I want to share with you today, is what some of those findings are. But first, let's have a little fun. Let's talk about life in space. Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, just to be able to float around from one place to the other. The bathroom thing, I'm not sure if that would be so much fun, but it would be good. And through the NSBRI and NASA, I've been given access to a group of kind of a committee of astronauts to bounce ideas off of and ask them about, what about this idea? What about that idea? Do you think it would work? And so in discussion with them, I asked them a couple things. I said, what is life like in space? And they helped me realize that a lot of things that you and I do on a daily basis, they have to kind of relearn and find a different way to do it. You know, one example was eye drops. So, you know, on Earth, we just simply roll our head back and gravity brings the drop in there. I said, how do you do eye drops in space? And they said, well, you know, we've kind of figured that out. We just take the bottle and we take the drop and we let it float there, and we open up our eye and we kind of run in. Hopefully we hit it on our eye. If not, we just keep going until we get it. And so a lot of the things that you and I take for granted, they change. And I think it'd be a lot of fun to be in space. But there are also a lot of risks that go with it. And we're finding that the longer we leave people in space on long duration flights, we've had astronauts for 6 months now, and now we've got 2 of them working on a year, these physical problems are starting to show up. And some of them are pretty serious, and a lot of them have to do with vision, which is, of course, what we want to talk about. And some of these are showstoppers. These are things that will stop us from being able to go to Mars. So obviously we have to figure them out, and we have to find out what the solution is. So some of the problem is coming from body fluids shifting in space. So the body was designed on Earth with gravity to distribute all the fluids around the body evenly. But when you take away gravity, some of those fluids tend to shift towards the head and other parts of the body where they're not supposed to be normally in gravity. And some of that's creating intracranial pressure. And then intracranial pressure is starting to press on the back of the eye a little bit and flattening the globe to some degree. And as you can imagine, that sounds bad. It is bad. And so some of the other problems that are coming up that we've discovered in this is called a hyperopic shift. So normally the eye, there's a lot of things that have to do with how you see and how you focus on things, but one of them is the axial length. And if you flatten that axial length, you change the focusing ability of the eye, and so the glasses that the astronauts went up with a couple months down the road aren't functioning anymore, don't work for them. And some astronauts that go up with no glasses at all now become hyperopic. And so since we don't have a lens crafters on the space station, we have to figure out a way to give them glasses that can work for them. And some of the other problems that are happening, the physiological problems. There's papilledema, which is kind of swelling of that disc area. Choroidal folds, so that actually as you push in the back of the eye, the retina's got to go somewhere, so it tends to fold over. And these are problems that don't just go away when they land. These are problems that stay with them for a lifetime. So obviously, if we're going to look at 2-year missions, we really have to solve these problems. And that's really what the committee was trying to do. And that's what NASA's trying to do in conjunction with the NSBRI. And so the NSBRI is connected with institutions and experts all around the world. And what they've done is they've kind of taken the body and divided it into, I think it's like 7 regions, and vision being one of those regions. And so they're trying to study about bones and muscles and the heart, and all these things undergo some very negative effects in longer term flights, things again that will keep us from going to Mars. So the NSBRI is doing a great job of doing that, and that's why they had the committee. But the optical industry is also helping too. So one of the ways that we're doing it is through grants that the NSBRI gives small emerging companies to help them develop their technologies that will work and solve some of these problems on space. And the grant that they gave me and my company allows us to do that also. Here's a picture with me and some of my group of astronauts that I've been able to work with, and this is the Vision for Mars Challenge logo. So the grant that they gave me, now, first of all, the whole goal is to solve the problem, the hyperopic shift and the globe flattening and some of the other things that go on with the eye. And so the idea is to solve that problem so we just don't have to worry about it. But if that doesn't happen, and subsequent to that, we still have to be able to provide the astronauts glasses so they can read checklists, so they can read instruments. And as their vision changes, we've got to do that. So one of the technologies that we're working on with a couple of other companies is to be able to come up with reprogrammable glasses. So you would take your glasses, you would plug them into your computer, and you would reprogram the lenses so that they would have a different prescription. So instead of going down and having the lenses remade, you would just reprogram the lenses. So if you can envision that, that's pretty exciting and pretty sexy, and it is a reality. And so we're going to do it in 2 ways. We're going to reprogram the lenses so that we can change the RX, so that as we do the eye exam, we find that they've changed to half a diopter, 3/4, whatever it might be, we just have them plug in their glasses and reprogram them. So that's great. But we can even take it to the next step and take a look at all the tasks that astronauts have that require vision at different distances, near, intermediate, up above, over here, looking at the robotic arm. There's a lot of things going on, different distances. Wouldn't it be great if we had glasses that as they looked, and the glasses are smart enough to know what the astronaut's looking at, what distance they're looking at, and immediately in a nanosecond change the power of that lens so that it gave them maximum viewing at that different distance. We can do that, and we're working on that now, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Again, all being programmed because obviously if they're on their way to Mars, we can't just say, oops, we forgot to give you those glasses. We want to be able to reprogram them. That's why it's important to do it and to make them in this way. So let's talk about changing the power. So first of all, is this an issue? Does it need a solution? It really does. 70% of the astronauts that have been on long-duration flights, and long duration is considered 6-month mission or more, have come back with some kind of visual change. Some have come back with nothing, some come back with significant changes, and significant would be a couple of them had a diopter and a half or diopter and 3/4. And if you're not from the optical industry, that is a lot. In fact, it's enough to make it so they can't read their checklists, so they can't read instruments. There was even an incident when they were landing the shuttle that the pilot was landing and realized that the vision had changed so much that he had to hand over the landing to the co-pilot because he just didn't feel comfortable with it. That's the kind of effect that we're having. So currently what they're doing is they're taking up multiple pair of glasses. So we're kind of guessing at the prescription change and what it will be. And so as we do, eye exams in space, we'll say, well, switch to glasses number 3 or glasses number 4. But this is not a good solution. I was really excited to see Switch Vision. You all got a pair of sunglasses when you came in. I didn't know they were doing this. But one of the technologies was Switch Vision. Companies already out in the market that I ran across a couple months ago presented it to NASA. And so now what we're going to be doing in the future, they're sort of flight certifying these now, is we'll just be taking up groups of lenses. So it's not as heavy. And by the way, it's $100,000 per pound to put something in space. So you think, well, it's just a couple pair of glasses. Well, that could be a couple $100,000 to get those glasses up there. So this is a great solution temporarily, but long term, we have to have the programmable glasses, and that's the direction that we're going. So just envision what's happening here. So we're taking the glasses, and for the younger astronauts that don't need bifocals, we would just change and reprogram the lens for the whole lens for them in single vision. But for the older, and about 40% of them do need some kind of near vision correction, presbyopia or presbyopic. And so we want to be able to change the prescription in the near independently from the distance, independently from the middle. And with the technology we have today, we can do that. And so that's the direction that we're working, is to make the glasses so we could just reprogram them and make it whatever it is that they need at that time. We can even add astigmatism, which is kind of astounding to think that we could be able to do that. The second thing we want to be able to do is to change the power of the lens automatically to have this auto-focusing capability so the lens changes with whatever distance they're working at. And if you think about and look about at all the different things that they're doing in space. Just take, for example, the robotic arm. Somebody's working, one of the astronauts was telling me he was really frustrated, was because he's working at the robotic arm and he has things that he has to look at from 16 inches to 32 inches here on the panel, but then he has to immediately look up and see what's happening with the robotic arm. A lot going on. You can imagine in the control panel or in the capsule there where they've got all the instruments when they're landing. And they've got vision at all these different distances that they're looking at and changing all the time. Well, these glasses are smart enough to know which distance the astronaut is looking at and to change the whole lens automatically, instantaneously to maximize the power for them in that distance. And so how would that work? So the technology to change the power of the lens is there, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you in just a minute. But for the autofocusing capabilities, there's a couple ways that it could be done. but it's technology that's already out there today. We just have to kind of refocus it for glasses. So one of the ways to do it would be to put kind of IR devices in here. It's kind of, you guys that play golf, ladies that play golf too, you know, you take your range finder and it sends out light and brings it back and tells you how far it is. It's kind of the same thing. So that then would tell the lenses you need to be a +3, you need to be a -2, or whatever the power might be at that time. So that's one way. The other way, which I think is really interesting, is looking at the eyes and seeing what the gaze is. So, for example, as you look at distance, your eyes move across like that. As you look at near, they converge so that you look at something near and you're getting a focal point. If you look at intermediate, it's changing. So each distance that you look at has a different gaze, and the distance between your pupils is different. So we can put a device in the nose pads or in the back of the eye wire so that it knows what your gaze is at that time, and then immediately change the focus of that lens for that. And that, I think, is pretty exciting, the direction that we're going to. So if I can get this to work, which I hope I can. Oops. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. Let me show you, this is a lens that has this auto-focusing capability. So you see there's 3 different distances that we're looking at. And so if we change the power of the lens, you can now see intermediate, but the near is fuzzy. So now we could change the power of the lens so that you can see it at different distances. Let me just maybe play that for you one more time because that goes kind of quick. You can see at infinity with no problem. But at the intermediate's blurry, we change the power of the lens, we reprogram that lens on the fly, or we reprogram it so you can see near. So that's one. I'll show you another example of another technology. So you can see the distance comes into focus pretty good, but the label at the front is not. So as we change the focus and we change where we're looking and where the gaze would be, it changes the power of that lens instantaneously. I'll just do that one more time. Distance looks good, the near not so good. So we're changing the focus, we're looking at it, and boom, it changes the power of that lens so that does it. So the question is this possible or is this Star Wars? Is this something that somebody's written on the back of a cocktail napkin? Not really. Actually, we're working through the NSBRI grant to recommend to NASA a couple of companies, global companies, that have this capability already. And they've already demonstrated that it works. The lenses that you saw, we were looking through those lenses. Now, don't run down to your eye doctor and say, I want some of those autofocusing glasses, because it'll probably be, I would suspect, 3 or 4 years before they're to that stage. But there's no obstacles in the way between now and the glasses going on your face that should be showstoppers, should be things that would make it. All the technology's there, it just has to be redesigned. So we're working with them to make that happen. Now, the cool thing is that NASA and NSBRI have always said anything that we spend tax dollars on for the space program, we want to make sure that it comes back and helps mankind. And if you think about those of you that are old enough and have enough gray hairs as I do, you remember some of the things that have come out of the space program, like Tang. You remember that? You young folks have no idea what Tang is about. But it was kind of cool. Teflon came out of the space program, and on and on and on. Lots of technologies we've benefited from. And they said, if we're going to give you the grant money, you also need to be able to make sure that these are usable for mankind. And if you think about autofocusing glasses, they would be very helpful and very useful for you in your everyday tasks. Your smartphones, your computer, your driving, everything that you do, if you could make it so you could maximize vision and the power of those glasses that you're wearing for the distance that you're looking at, that would be mind-blowing, I think. And the possibilities with the technology that's being developed is just limitless in terms of eyeglasses and how you're going to be seen. So that's kind of my prepared section. Do you have any questions on what the technology would be? Thank you.
Somebody have their hand up somewhere here.
Over here.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you, Bob. You mentioned two companies that you were working with. One was Deep Optics. I didn't hear the other one.
Because of confidentiality agreements, we're still holding back on that. We'll probably be announcing it in the next month or so, but they've asked to not be made public yet.
Okay.
But they're a real company. They're funded, and they actually already do some work for the government, so they're going to be a real thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question while we're finding another speaker commenter out there. Is there any evidence that once the astronauts return to Earth after a certain period of time, the refractive error, their original state of their eye returns?
Okay, so great question. In most, not most, about half of the cases, they do go back to their original prescription, but many of them don't. And so if they picked up, let's say, a diopter of hyperopia, they keep that diopter of hyperopia. And a lot of the choroidal folds, the cotton wool spots, things that are bad for the eye, they don't go away. And this is why we have to find a solution for it. You know, I was having lunch with one of the astronauts the other day, and I asked him, because he had had a change in his prescription, and I said, so does that bother you that you were up there and now you come back and you know that the physiology and your prescription of your eye has changed? And, you know, they all seem to have this really cowboy attitude. They're all like the ones that I've talked to anyway are, that's just part of the program. We knew that when we went into the space program. And it really just gives you a warm feeling that these folks are willing to put their body and their everything at risk so that we can, for the space program. I think it's pretty exciting. Anybody else?
Hello. Kirk Greenway, Indian Health Service. I'm the statistician there. I just want to ask you, is this technology power dependent? What kinds of power considerations are there for maintenance of the prescription or the changing shapes of the lens or so forth? How did you deal with the power issues?
Okay,
so sensors too, right?
And that's a great question. There is a power need. So what's happening is, just to kind of dwell on it a little longer, for normal eyeglasses to change the power so that you can see and focus, and after you go to the optometrist or the ophthalmologist, they give you a prescription, and so the lab changes that lens so that either the curvature is changed or the thickness of the lens is changed or the index or the material. Those three things make up the power of your lens right now. There's some other things, but those are the majority of them. So in electronic eyeglasses, what's happening most of the time is they're putting a layer of LCD crystals in there. And so these crystals, liquid crystals, and so the crystals, when you apply electricity to them in very small amounts, it only takes milliwatts, it changes the way that they bend light. So in liquid crystals, you can see it through them. So they have a good high transmissibility. But when the light comes in and power is applied to them, they have the ability to bend the light. So rather than having really thick glasses, if you have a really high prescription, you could have really thin glasses. And with this liquid crystal display in there, we could apply the right amount of power to it and give it refractive capabilities, no matter if it's a small prescription or it's a high prescription. It's the same thing. You just bend the light as it comes in as it goes through the liquid crystals by applying power. So that's a very simplistic kind of explanation, but it's pretty cool. And so if you now build these liquid crystals that you put inside the lens in a wafer, or there are a couple different ways to put it in, you can divide it into sections. And so that's how you can also make it so that the bottom or the middle or the distance part could have different powers at different times, because the liquid crystals are pixelated throughout the lens. And so that's going to add to the technology and make the lenses a lot more flexible. So we now could have aspheric lenses that give you good vision all the way out to the side. It's kind of fun stuff. Anybody, you ready for a pair? I'm ready for a pair.
Hi, Bob. Sherry Williams,
Hi, Sherry.
CEO of Prevent Blindness, the Ohio affiliate. Our advocate asked a good question because she has vision in only one eye, and uses a polycarbonate lens, obviously, to protect that vision. Would the installation of the crystals, the liquid crystals, be possible in a shatterproof type lens?
Well, you could put the crystals in any lens, any material. You just have to reconfigure how that material impacts the liquid crystals. But yeah, you could certainly do that. Yes, absolutely. Sports, anything like that. Yep. So, I don't want to mislead you. We're kind of between where we're at now and where we're going to be in the future. It's going to take 5 or 10 years to have glasses that are fully functional, like you're saying. But I think in 3 to 4 years, we'll have glasses that we'll be clinically studying to make sure that they meet all the criteria.
I just have a follow-up question related to that. How about implementation in intraocular lens design?
Yes, and there's actually several companies that are using this core technology now for implants, and there are a lot of different things. So one of the challenges that ophthalmologists have, and I used to be an assistant for an ophthalmologist, when we put a lens inside of an eye, they're certainly based on a lot of algorithms and the skill of the surgeon as to what power of the lens that we put in. But when you put that in, it might be off a half a diopter. And there are ways to kind of get around it, but the only way to really solve it is to take the lens out and put a new one in. But you could reprogram this lens, and so you would put it in the eye and say, oh, we missed it by half diopter, no big deal, and we reprogram the lens to adjust for that. So there are a lot of technologies. Now, we're not working on that with NASA and the NSBRI. They don't want to cut into astronauts at all for any technology. They've made that very clear from the beginning, but that is an option. Yep. Anybody else? Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.